Overall, we are facing these multiple converging crises.
Climate change, energy, food, the economy, and even terrorism, all of which are escalating.
What's happening in this context is that rather than dealing with the root structural causes of these crises,
which are often rooted in state policies and interstate policies, what you're seeing instead is states are much more able and willing to maximize their military capacity to maintain the structure of an unequal global economic system, often using terrorism as a justification. And we find that a parallel process is happening domestically. Governments are increasingly enacting more and more legislation that encroaches on civil liberties, that allows them to survey communities, monitor people's lives, their ability to control their populations, their ability to counteract the rise of dissident movements.
Civil defense is government operating in an emergency. By 10:55, the heads of utilities, Red Cross, military liaison, Civil Air Patrol, Weather Bureau, and all city departments are functioning as a civil defense team.
When you look at some of the defence planning documents that have been released from the British, from the European Union, from the United States, planning documents created by defence planners, people working in the military, what's interesting about the documents is that a lot of them show that many of the people working on national security are aware of some of these crises. They are looking at climate change and they're saying climate change is going to be a problem. They're looking at food shortages, they're looking at energy shortages, they're looking at water shortages, and they're saying there's going to be massive stress. It's important to understand that the people creating these plans work in the military. They're not necessarily part of a big conspiracy of any kind. They're on a salary and they're told, okay, look at these crises, find out what's going on, let's think about it. What's driving this process of militarization is a very narrow lens of looking at the world. And again, it does come back to these implicit assumptions about how the world works, these neoliberal ideas about us living in the most advanced system possible. So what you find is that when you have all of these implicit assumptions about the way the world works, and then you're coming at it from a military angle, which is all about, well, we need to defend this society against new threats, then the only way you can respond to it, if you're going to look at it from that angle, is with guns. Even though guns are never going to solve your problem, because you can't deal with economics with guns. You can't deal with melting glaciers with guns. You can't deal with the fact that you're depleting your oil reserves with guns. But when you've paid a couple of defense planners, then they're only going to come up with solutions based on guns because that's all they know.
The time is 11:10. This is an official civil defense broadcast. Keep your radio tuned to this frequency.
In the UK, we have what is called the Civil Contingencies Act, which passed in 2004. The government now has extraordinary powers which it can impose on its own will if it considers that there is a national emergency. Now, what's worrying is that the things that the government is able to do in the context of such an emergency are really extraordinary. So they could confiscate property, anybody's property. They can set up new courts outside of the existing judicial system to pass judgment on things. They can cancel elections. They can set up curfews whenever they feel like, so to stop people from travelling at certain times. They can cordon off entire public areas and simply prevent people from accessing them. They can arrest people and detain them for any duration of time. What it basically does is pave the way to a full-on authoritarian state and the end of democracy.
Some people might think that I'm being alarmist, but it is alarming, and I think we should all be alarmed because the legislation really speaks for itself.
And so this day called X, which began in such an ordinary way, is no ordinary day. At 10:35, the banshee wail of the siren echoes the warning, and the city prepares for survival.
these powers have nothing to do with responding effectively in a robust way to national emergencies. When you look at what the government should be doing in terms of looking locally, assessing the different kinds of risks, looking at what facilities and infrastructures are existing in different parts of the country, what do we need to do to increase the capacity of our facilities to respond effectively to real emergencies? What is the government actually doing on the ground to make us empowered to respond properly and appropriately? Nothing is happening. The government's not doing anything. There's no investment. There's no real analysis. There are some processes in place, but it's very, very minimal. So when you compare that level of inaction with the huge level of interest in maximizing the state's powers, their police powers, their military powers, and their powers of social control, there's this massive gulf. And it's very clear to me that all of this acceleration of state power at the expense of our civil liberties and our human rights and our dignity as individuals is happening in direct response to the fact that at its fundamental level they're losing control, and they're more and more worried about maintaining order, maintaining the status quo, maintaining business as usual. Rather than dealing with the real causes, all they're doing is dealing with symptoms, while things actually will continue to get worse because the systemic causes of this crisis convergence are still there.
I never did anything bad. Honest. Look at yourself real close.
What I'm seeing really is that a lot of the mainstream conventional thinking is not self-reflective enough. There isn't enough capacity to look at what we have done wrong. What have we done as our societies that isn't working, that needs to change? There's not enough willingness to accept that maybe the path that we've gone on hasn't been optimal, hasn't been the best way for humanity ever.